Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the Young Leaders Council's first ever Inclusion Talks panel. We are very excited to be hosting this event in collaboration with the Best Buddies National Jobs Team. Today's event will serve as an opportunity to foster discussions on topics that are crucial in creating inclusive workplaces and supportive of all individuals, regardless of background or ability. Our six incredible panelists will share their insights and experiences regarding inclusive hiring practices, retention strategies, and accommodations that should be considered in the workforce. Without further ado, I would like to start by introducing one of our speakers, Emily Vorday.
Hi, everybody. Wonderful to be with you all today. My name is Emily Wardy. I am a white woman with blonde hair that's pulled back in a clip, wearing a black top today. I am coming to you from South Bend, Indiana, and I myself am a person with a physical disability. I use a wheelchair. I am the founder and CEO of Into Strategies, a disability-led firm that helps to bring people with disabilities of all types into what we call moments, movements, and campaigns. So kind of any space in which we are underrepresented, which, as many of you know, is all spaces, including the workforce. So really grateful to be here with you today and share the stage with so many wonderful co-panelists.
Now, to introduce our next speaker, I'd like to share a little bit about Horace Porras. Born and raised in New Jersey, Horace is a global human resources executive that has held different international roles in several multinational companies such as Schlumberger, the world's leading supplier of technology integrated project management and information solutions to customers working in the oil and gas industry, and in other organizations such as American Tower, MasterCard, and McDonald's. He is also a Marshall Goldsmith certified business coach. Horace holds a bachelor's degree in business management and a master's in human resources management, fluent in English, Spanish, and Portuguese, as well as knowledgeable in French and Italian. That has allowed him to forge a strong global experience in human resources, such as VP of Human Resources Latin America, Head of Human Resources for Continental Europe, Head of Global Mobility, and Global VP of Human Resources and Transformation. One of the highlights of Horace's career has been hiring and integrating people with intellectual and developmental disabilities into several of the companies that he's worked for, mainly as global ambassadors for Best Buddies International.
Awesome. Our next speaker I'd like to introduce is Matthew Smith. Matthew is the manager of job development for Best Buddies International in Los Angeles. He has had over 5 years of experience working with individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities between day programs, residential care, and supported employment agencies. Matthew currently oversees a caseload of over 20 individuals who are either seeking job opportunities or maintaining their careers.
Our next speaker we'd like to introduce is Pierre Gaster. Pierre is an experienced operations director for JLL. Prior to working with JLL, he was in the hospitality hotel management field for over 20 years. Pierre started working with Best Buddies about 3 years ago and now has 4 participants on his team. Pierre is JLL's biggest cheerleader for the partnership with Best Buddies. He's passionate about workplace inclusion because he has a learning disability and believes everyone has a role in the workplace.
The next speaker I'd like to introduce is Sam Hirsch. Sam has been the program manager for mission expansion at Best Buddies Los Angeles since February of 2023. Prior to working for Best Buddies, he worked in the Career Center at his alma mater, the University of California, Los Angeles, where he primarily assisted in the development of resumes and cover letters for graduating students. As the only person with IDD to work there, Sam was instrumental in introducing his colleagues to the resources and centers that he used throughout his job search, including Best Buddies Jobs and the website Regional Center. Sam has been a participant in Best Buddies since June of 2019. He started out as a jobs participant, then he became a state ambassador, and finally became an employee of the company. Since starting at BBCA, Sam has focused on rebuilding relationships with schools in West LA and the Inland Empire, including Jeffen Academy at UCLA, California State University, and Ranch Cucamonga High School. He's also on track to open a total of 10 new Best Buddy chapters by next fall. He enjoys talking with volunteers and participants and often uses his personal experience as a jobs participant and ambassador to teach students the importance of Best Buddies programs, models, and its wider impact. In his spare time, Sam's enjoys writing, photography, going to concerts, and dancing.
Last but certainly not least, we have our final speaker who is a member of our employment initiative, Terrence Moore. Terrence is from Brooklyn, New York. He joined Best Buddies in 2017 as a jobs participant. He joined the jobs program because he wanted to be able to find employment and get acquainted with a new experience and work in the working world. Terrence is also a New York State ambassador for Best Buddies, as well as a member of the Young Leaders Council. He currently works as a guest service agent for JLL, and he loves what he does.
Awesome. Once again, thank you again for all of our amazing speakers for being here. We are very appreciative. And we're going to go ahead and start with the panel by jumping right into our first question, which is what approaches can be taken to advancing diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility within the hiring process? We'll start first with Horace and then move on to Sam. So Horace, do you have any thoughts of how we can advance diversity in the hiring process?
Sure. Thank you, Celeste. And well, it's great to be here. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I've been working and partnering with Best Buddies for around 15 years already. So always glad to help and support in any possible way. So in terms of your question, I would say that one of the key things really is that if we want to be better in terms of our hiring processes, advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion, and accessibility. Definitely, this has to come from the top, right? It's something that the CEO, the leadership, has to really cascade this down as a principle. And then, when you started to actually the task itself is, developing inclusive job descriptions, using inclusive language and focusing on qualifications rather than demographics, so we can actually attract broader, more diverse pool of candidates. And also, once that is done, it's also expanding the sourcing channels, is looking for candidates that are from underrepresented groups through diverse job boards, professional associations, networking events, and community partnerships that can actually broaden that candidate pipeline. And the other thing that has been very positive, and I have used this as well, is what we call the blind recruitment practices, which is basically removing any identifying information such as name, gender, pictures from resumes during the initial screening. So in that sense, you only have the professional qualifications, you also have the education, but nothing else that can actually tell the person, what background the individual has, right? So that can help mitigate any unconscious biases and ensure that candidates are evaluated just, on their qualifications. Linked to this, I think that training the hiring managers and the interviewers on unconscious bias awareness and inclusive interviewing techniques is essential, and it gives them the skills to recognize and mitigate biases, and again fostering that fair treatment of all candidates. The other thing is when you get to that interview part, I think that when you have diverse interview panels is also important from different backgrounds and levels within the organization, because in that way you're going to be ensuring different perspectives that can be considered during the candidate evaluations. So that will lead also to more equitable hiring decisions. And having these structured interview processes also allows to ensure consistency and fairness, right? So if you have standardized interview questions and evaluation criteria, that will minimize the influence of any kind of subjective biases across the candidate assessments. And probably, I mean, the list can be very long, but I think it's, we also have to consider providing accessibility accommodations. So this needs to show consideration, that some candidates might have some disabilities, and we can offer like alternative interview formats, assistive technologies, communication methods. And basically that also demonstrates how the company is committed, to these kind of practices. So these are some of the thoughts. I can probably work in human resources. I could probably go on for a little while, but I want to be respectful of everyone's time.
Yeah, thank you so much, Horace. That was incredibly insightful. Emily, do you want to share your thoughts on the topic? Or I'm sorry, not Emily. I forgot. It's Sam. I
Don't worry.
totally apologize for that.
I was just gonna say, I think Sam was queued up. So yep, go for it, Sam.
Well, in a practical sense, I have 4 words, or 6, or even 7. Make the entirety of your forms accessible, right? It's a practical step towards advancing all of these topics that we want to talk about. The easiest way it can be done from the inside out. Horace, you talked about it coming from the top down, but the easiest way it can be done from the inside out is making sure that all of the forms you use, from the intake forms to when you do interviews, to even the job application forms when a candidate gets hired, and even the forms they have to use and send out to potential clients, etc. You can't take accessibility in forms for granted. And I've been hanging up on this for a year and a half. Matt knows the ropes with me because we work together. But it's often the easiest way for you to put those beliefs in practice is literally take a piece of paper that may not seem accessible to you and make it as accessible as you can, and allowing your co-workers with IDDs to test the validity of those forms to make sure the language is clear and that they can fill them out and deliver them on time.
Thank you both for providing your perspectives on advancing DEIA within the hiring practice. Moving on to our next question is for Terrence. Is there a specific accommodation or benefit that the Best Buddies Jobs program has provided to help you?
Yes, JLL has indeed provided specific accommodations that I believe I guess do benefit me. I mean, as long as the Best Buddies Jobs program itself, because in many weeks when I find myself doing my daily routine, I sometimes find myself forgetting either important things which I feel may not be as important, but actually really are. So I pretty much had a little, like, I'd say I call a little piece of paper that I could just stick to the underside of the monitor every day, and that when I follow it and when I come in the morning, I just automatically know off the top of my head what to do every morning, so that I don't leave any important details out. Because being a GSA, we're the first people that the associates see when they come in through our doors, and it's always good for me to be precise, to even be on time with everything when responding to emails, because people love quick responses, and when you show that, it really says a lot about you and your team. So I'm just glad that JLL can provide me any accommodation I need to keep up with the pace, and I'm glad that it's working out pretty well for me.
Thank you for sharing your personal experience, Terrence. It's very insightful. We're going to go ahead and move on to our next question, which will be for Emily this time, and then we'll move on to Horace. So, Emily, in your experience, how do you approach creating an inclusive interview process to ensure all candidates, regardless of background, have an equitable opportunity to showcase their skills?
Yeah, thank you so much, Celeste, for the question. This is Emily. I think Horace and Sam honestly touched on many aspects of this, but a few things come to mind. One, just making sure that you are asking in your process in a straightforward, visible, accessible way, whether there are any accommodations that would assist this candidate in being able to access the process equitably. So often, as a person with a disability myself, or as a practitioner, I've seen where, language inviting requests for accommodations is included in 2-point font at the very bottom of an email or at the very bottom of a form. And that is neither accessible nor, equitable when the process is additionally cumbersome and that onus is put on the, person with a disability. So I make it a standard part of my practice that when I am scheduling a meeting or scheduling an interview, I am asking each and every single person that I'm meeting with whether they have any requests for accommodation that would make this meeting more accessible to them, as just part of standard required practice. And the worst case, quote unquote, scenario is that person doesn't, and they just say, no, but thanks for asking, not applicable. But that means you're not putting additional onus, additional barrier on that person with a disability to seek out the accommodation or seek out the process in a time that is already, quite vulnerable in interview process. Secondarily, I always really encourage hiring managers to provide candidates with multiple modalities through which to complete their interviews, consistent with what is going to be most appropriate for that job or for that venue. So maybe that is a one-on-one in-person interview in some instances. Maybe that's a Zoom interview. Maybe there's an opportunity for the candidate to actually record responses to a question and send them in. Maybe there's an opportunity for written responses to questions, right? It's going to vary from job to job and job description to job description, but being open and thinking about what you are trying to ascertain from that candidate as opposed to kind of a one-size-fits-all model for the process.
Wow, no, completely agree. I love how your approach is open and flexible and takes account people's different needs and abilities. Great response. Horace, do you have anything to add on to this?
Yeah, I think well, Emily was spot on everything that she said. And, to add to one of her comments about asking for feedback to candidates, I think that's very important, to have that active listening to the perspectives of the candidates and implementing any kind of constructive suggestions. It also demonstrates, again, as an employer, that there is a commitment, to fostering an inclusive environment, and that all voices are valued and heard. I think that one aspect that's probably a little bit more technical, and in the background, is about the diversity metrics, that we have in the company. To look into the hiring process and identify areas for improvement, how to measure the effectiveness, of our DEIA initiatives, tracking and analyzing the demographics, representation at different recruitment stages, and the time to hire, right? So I think that also helps, to improve, because this is something that you just not develop, implement, and it's there forever. It's something that needs to continue evolving to be better, and as the planet continues to change. And all that has to also help and feed into, to me, what is another critical aspect, which is the onboarding plan, right? Once a person has been interviewed, is now hired, is joining the company, it's critical to have those inclusive onboarding practices as well, right? So it's not just the interviews. Now it's on the job, it's at the company, right? And that also helps, promote that sense of belonging, and it helps retain the top talent, right? And of course, fosters a very supportive organizational culture. And one thing that I would like to add as well is that I think that uh, we also always need to remind the hiring managers not to think on behalf of the candidates. And what I mean is that we might have the requirements for a certain job, and we might initially think that maybe this person is not going to be comfortable with this, with that, or will not like this or that. It's that we have our own doubts. Well, maybe it's not the case for the candidate, right? So let's not basically say, well, no, I don't think that he or she will like this, right? Let's leave the candidate, evaluate everything and come back and basically say, yeah, this is for me, or you know what, maybe not, or have a discussion, open it up. But again, do not think on behalf of the candidates. And I'm going to give you a little example, which is not exactly related to the interview process, but it helps a little bit, is when I was in one of the companies that I worked for, we were talking about having a maternity policy, right? And we were saying, well, the US has, a couple of weeks, and these countries in Europe, Latin America have months, almost a year on maternity leave. So why don't we have a policy that is consistent across the board, right? And the same for everyone. And really, the after having some discussions, the approach was, well, let's not, right? And let's have a flexible policy which will accommodate the reality of each one of those mothers, right? Because some mothers have probably a super supportive structure, and they're ready to go back, as soon as possible, or maybe because they want to go back as soon as possible. Some other mothers and fathers as well, we might want to be with our baby until they are 18 years old, right? Because they're still going to be our babies. So, if you push, for someone to go back too fast, it can be bad. If you actually tell someone that is ready to go back immediately, oh, you have to wait another 4 months, it can also, not be a very positive thing. So what I'm trying to say is, let's not think on behalf of the candidates, right? And let's have an open conversation with, all the requirements, all what is, needed on the job, etc., and what is the, candidate expecting as well.
Thank you, Emily and Horace, for discussing your approaches to equitable interview practices. Our next question is, how does supportive accommodation give purpose to your life? How does it impact you, how you show up in other areas of your career? We will start with Pierre and then have Matthew share.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Over the years, I've had a couple of accommodations for myself, as well as given accommodations to employees. I'll just talk a little bit about myself and then talk about some of the accommodations I've given to some employees. I've had twofold. One, when I was in college taking a class and requested to have an accommodation, and this was shortly after the ADA was passed, about a year afterwards. And unfortunately, the professor was not willing to make the accommodation, and we had to kind of show him the law and explain to him that this was required, which was a little bit of a setback for me. But because of that, I was able to pass that exam and ace that class, which was really, really good. But over the years, I have given accommodations to folks that I have supervised. Some of them have been technology accommodations, like myself, to either read or write with certain technologies. And it's been an awesome help to me. I've seen it have some amazing impacts on some of our employees to be able to be given those accommodations. It strengthens think a lot of your confidence in your work, and you become, I think, a little bit more outgoing because of it. So over the years, it's been great for myself and for my employees. Thank you.
Thank you for providing a unique perspective that includes your personal experiences receiving accommodations, as well as how you've been able to help others by offering accommodations within your various roles. Matthew, what has been your experience working with the Best Buddies Job program, and how do you feel supportive accommodations gives purpose to the lives of those you work with?
Thank you, Vanessa. Pierre, I really love the example of, like accommodations around taking exams and stuff. And I think that's really what it comes down to is just allowing these candidates and participants to see everything that they're fully capable of. It's going to build their confidence, and it's also going to kind of like stoke the curiosity of the people around them. If it's like in the employment field, their leadership will be able to see what they're really capable of and, possibly explore other opportunities for career growth. And then just that confidence all around, it's going to spill out more than into just their career. It's going to go into their life. And then hopefully down the line, they're going to be able to lend that hand or that insight to other candidates that are coming in.
Awesome. Thank you both for sharing that. I love how you not only talked about, yes, accommodations does, help you do your job, but it also has like psychological impact of giving people confidence and sparking curiosity. I think that's very important. Our next question is for Sam, and then Pierre will follow. So Sam, could you share a personal experience where the retention efforts or specific accommodations provided at a job positively influenced your job satisfaction or even someone else's commitment to the organization?
Well, you may not, thank you, Celeste. You may not see the entirety of my office, but Matthew here was instrumental in securing all of the accommodations I need, including but not limited to switching my computer from this part of my desk to the front part of my desk. You can see behind me there are two garbage pickers that look like, well, I call them garbage pickers, but they're high strength grabbing utensils that allow me to pick everything up except my phone for some reason. And you can see several command hooks where my work bag is behind me. The office is entirely accommodating and accessible. And we also worked pretty hard to install an automatic door in the Best Buddies LA office. Finally, it took a year, but God knows we were all happy when that happened. Which means that I can safely maneuver in and out of the office on my own without worrying about anyone else being in there. Previous to that, my colleagues had to set up a Teams group for us to let us know if either one of us was coming into the office so that I could be let in. So that is a simple fact of how accommodations have vastly improved my own feeling of security within the physical space in which I work. And since Matt and I were ECs, or employment consultants, job coaches together, I'm sure that he can explain that a bit more fully. But Pierre, do you have anything to add as well?
Sure. I think some of the accommodations that I have at work are maybe not something that everybody sees. They're the technology that I use to help me read and to write, and the client that we work with, we use their technology with JLL. And the technology I was given, which is basically a something that will read the text that I type, and that's just huge to me. That helps me read and write. I think over the years, I've been using that now for several years, and it has improved my writing tremendously. Being dyslexic, it's all my life I've had a challenge with reading and writing. So that's a huge accommodation to me. It's one of those things that you may just think I'm at my desk listening to music, but no, I'm typing something away and then just kind of listening to it and see what it sounds like. And it's helped me so much with my confidence at work, with my writing abilities and everything. It's huge. The nice thing about it is we did have a nice We had a young lady who started with us recently with Best Buddies in a location, and I noticed the same sort of disability that I have with her, and we were able to give her that accommodation kind of discreetly without letting everybody know about it, and it's helped her tremendously over the past several months. So it's huge for accommodations, and some of them are visible and some of them aren't, but they're a huge help to us.
Thank you for those insightful answers. Our last question of the day is, creating an inclusive workplace for people with IDD is crucial when considering DEIA efforts. Best Buddies offers inclusive workplace training to create this culture of belonging for employees with IDD. Can you share your insight into the importance of education in the space of disability inclusion? We will begin with Terrence.
So, one thing that I always think about whenever thinking about how important it is to educate in the space of disability inclusion is that I mean, you always pretty much have to start at a young age when teaching someone about the importance of inclusion, because I mean, even if they grow up to be like, outstanding people in life, they may forget an important rule about, how to treat those with IDD, and that, you can't treat them like they're aliens. They're just like you, only they need accommodations. So, from a very young age, if you start teaching them that in high school, they'll have a more open-minded sense of the world around them, because, I mean, not everyone is going to be able to, keep up with you in the workplace. So, if you have IDD coworkers, you have to, meet their needs. And I mean, they can even meet yours. Just because they have IDD doesn't mean they won't be able to meet yours. So, we're all the I mean, we're all unique, and we may not all be the same, but we're just all human, really. And I mean, I've learned more about, human experience from my position here at JLL, just how to accommodate with everybody, and reaching out to people like Pierre and Anne, if I ever need accommodations. So that's just one big effect on my life, and it can have an effect on yours if you help those out with IDD. So, inclusive workplaces, while it still may seem relatively small, I just think it's going to grow bigger, each and every day, as long as we continue this kind of thing to spread around in the world. So I feel like that's my whole insight into the whole thing. Yeah.
Thank you, Terrence. Emily, could you share your thoughts on this matter?
Yes, thanks for the question, and thanks, Terrence, for your insight. I really appreciate it. I think what I would add is, disability in all of its forms, disability broadly, as well as, like diagnosis specific language and knowledge, is not unlike, in many ways, conversations around race or religion or politics or sexual orientation. Sometimes if people don't have the language to talk about something, they, one of two things happens. Either they opt out and they don't talk about it at all, or they say the wrong thing, regardless of what their intention is, and they do harm, and they cause harm and cause, pain, and there's still really not a learning moment there. So I've found that kind of what I call like disability 101 language is so critical. Even if, amongst intra-community, even amongst people who are would consider themselves part of the disabled community or adjacent to the disabled community. It's an opportunity to ask questions and to learn kind of the foundational language, because you can't begin to talk about disability rights. You can't begin to talk about inclusive hiring practice or accommodations or disabled representation until you have that kind of foundational knowledge and language and understanding. So I find it to be incredibly critical. And I myself even am, in addition to conveying that information through the trainings that I host, I'm also trying to always, keep an open mind and inform myself and understand that I know, I am an expert in my lived experience and in my kind of corner of the disabled community, so to speak. But there's so much to know and understand and learn from other members of our community, whether that be in the chronic illness community, the IDD community, the learning disability community, whatever it may be. So keeping an open mind myself and always, approaching the topic with humility and kind of a growth mindset.
Last but certainly not least, we'll hear from Matthew.
Thank you. Yeah, I really stand by the idea of like planting those seeds young, and you know, hopefully down the line, these conversations will look very different for those that come after us. But a big part of what we do when we're doing our education for employer partners and stuff as well is um, kind of shifting the conversation from just being more of a like hiring to fill like a DEI position and having diverse staff, and switching that conversation to being like about how much of an asset the candidates that we offer really are. You know, they're not just hiring somebody for diversity, they're hiring a talented, skilled employee who's going to stick around and really be able to provide them what they're looking for. And just you know, when we get in there, we were able to help the employer have the tools to access that and help them build that relationship together. In my experience, the most successful placements that we have are the ones where the employers continuously seek out further education and ask the questions and find out what they can do better. So that way, our candidates are really just going back to unlocking their full potential. And the education is really just about like all of the things that it can be.
Thank you all for answering. Do any of the other speakers have anything they'd like to add for this question?
Not really.
Awesome. Well, thank you all that answered. I totally agree with the sentiment that there's always room to learn more, and there's just so much diversity, and talking to people, you get to learn a lot. So we're gonna go ahead and move on to the Q&A portion of the event. If any of our attendees have a question for any of our speakers, please either unmute and ask the question, or you can type it in the chat. Emily, I believe you got a question from Julia in the chat earlier. I'm not sure if you saw, but Julia was asking, in terms of the job postings, where do you think is the best place to put a clause about reaching out if you need accommodations? Is it at the top or the bottom?
That's a really great question. Thanks, Julia, for it. You know, the more visible, the better. I would say, you know, what I often encourage folks to do, if it's a form, and Sam spoke about this a little bit, first ensuring just that the form, like the job application itself, is accessible. But then
Yes.
also, yeah, but then also I always encourage people to make it a required field. So asking if are there any accommodations that would make this process more accessible to you? And then a text box, and making that required so that people can't move forward without having, you know, put something in that box. Again, even if it is just no, but you know, thanks, or NA, or whatever it may be. But making sure that that is in line and consistent, if not larger, than the rest of the information on that application. Not putting it, as I, you know, mentioned, in a 2-point font at the very, very bottom in the fine print of the posting or of the application.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Does anybody else have any questions?
I see Celeste asked a question in the chat and that says, could you share a personal experience where the retention efforts or specific accommodations provided at a job positively influenced your job satisfaction or even someone else's commitment to the organization? I can answer, but I'll also pick my other.
Yeah,
Okay.
I believe that was a question earlier, but if you have
Oh,
insights to it, I'd love to hear it. So yes, you can go ahead and answer that.
Oh, Celeste, it was you that typed that in there. I'm so sorry. I'm looking.
Oh no, you're good.
Reading the wrong things, but wanted to make sure we had gotten no.
Emily, I've got a question for you.
Sure.
You talked about language and applications, but what sort of language would you suggest putting in job ads to kind of encourage folks with some sort of disabilities to apply? Is there anything that you would recommend?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I think just going beyond kind of the required equal opportunity statement that's at the bottom, that's obviously incredible and helpful, but going beyond that, and I always look, whether it be in the posting or on the organization's website, just anything that kind of reflects their values and their culture, and how they can speak to that in terms of all forms of diversity, but also just specifically inclusion of people with disabilities. I think too, Horace made a really good point towards the beginning of the call, and I'm going to completely butcher it, Horace, so please or restate this for me, but you mentioned something along the lines of, focusing on like job functionalities and kind of outputs instead of process in how you're looking for a candidate. So like it doesn't have to be kind of this one size fits all candidate, but instead what kind of like skill set are you looking for in that person?
Yeah, yeah, and I think that to complement what Emily was saying, yes, the disclaimer is very helpful, but sometimes you see that people forget, instead of putting, sales representative, they would put salesman or saleswoman, replacing the he and she with they, which again, it includes everyone, and really putting a lot of focus on skills and qualifications, right? So I don't know, we're looking for candidates with strong project management skills, right? And try to avoid language that can put restrictions in terms of the candidates. Things, that could be also simple as, maybe use entry level, right? If you have a role that is entry level instead of, young and energetic, things like that, that again, with the description itself, it also invites more candidates to actually apply, and to feel that this is, probably the company that they want to work for, and things that, again, when they start in the job description and the posting, things like, join our team, and mention that it's a collaborative environment and a supportive workplace. I think those are probably better things to use instead of, we seek a top performer, we look someone who excels in this and that. I think if we want to have, create this inclusive environment, maybe, that type of language can be used.
Yep, totally agree. Let's see, greatly appreciate. Oh, it looks like we have another question for you, Emily, from Ben, saying, do you have any tips or advice for orgs in moving more towards this approach? Would love for our social media posts to be more accessible.
Yeah, sorry. Just for context, Emily, I was referring to like your image description and your alt text at the beginning of the. Yeah, so that's kind of just my opinion of the question. Thank you.
No, of course. Thanks for the question. So, absolutely, starting to include this as best practice in your social media posts. I think every platform that I'm aware of, social platform, as well as many like website post platforms, you're able to embed alt text into the image itself for screen reader accessibility. And then also, it doesn't hurt, in addition to, including that description in like either the caption or in a comment under that post. So let's say on Instagram or X or on LinkedIn, just saying image description : and then giving a brief description. That is not only best practice for people with IDD, but people with all kinds of disabilities. So the same goes for videos, audio description of videos. And, I always encourage folks to, because it can feel overwhelming, particularly with image descriptions, right? Because you feel like you have to explain every aspect of an image, but instead focusing on kind of the tangible, like what would you want the takeaway or the kind of like the vibe or the energy from that image to be? What do you want to convey to the audience? So happy to talk about it more offline, but those are just kind of my like initial 2 cents. But really applaud you for wanting to make that a commitment.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you for your feedback.
Just to add to that as well, thank you for bringing this up, Emily. In personal experience, and there's no telling what inaccessibility in forms can make one think, actually, or do. We don't have time to enumerate the ways that it should improve, but when I was working at UCLA, I used to help, as was read in my as Vanessa read in my biography, I used to help kids with resumes and cover letters, and we had to help them form their resume in such a specific way to be accommodating to entities that were not human, actually, to artificial intelligence applicant tracking systems. But we had to accommodate their resumes so that even those AI readers could read, quote unquote, the entirety of the information that they wanted to convey. So that's why accessibility in forms is also incredibly important. And by the way, I have a slightly buzzed haircut, I have a beard, and I'm wearing a watch, and I have a blue shirt that says life is better with Best Buddies on it.
Thank you, Sam. Does anybody have any other questions, or if the panelists have any closing remarks that they would like to share?
Sure, I'd like to just have a closing remark. Just wanted to send a special shout out to Terrence. Terrence has been on my team for a few years now and does an amazing job in New York, and has just really done great over the years, and we're so happy to have him on our team. So shout out to you, Terrence.
And I think if Matthew and I could share a bit of our experience working together, that'd be great. Matt, do you want to share something?
Sure. I mean, just going back to what we were talking about with the accommodations and stuff, just being able to see the growth in Sam since he started, because, you know, now he's got the accommodations in place and he can really do everything that he was capable of on his own and not having to rely on anybody else. He's really just doing everything that he can be doing. And he's just grown so much. And I'm no longer his job coach, but I'm always still really excited to now get to work with him as just a colleague and see that success from the sidelines.
And it's great to work with Ben too, and Julia and Chanel and everybody else and Mark and everybody else from Best Buddies that's on this call. We thank you for coming and supporting our efforts here. Also wanted to say, forgive me for adding this as a remark, but every time I hear the acronym DEIA, I always think of rearranging it. Does anybody know Latin? Well, Adei, ADEI, means from God. So if you look at all this as a religious practice, the worst types of religious practices are doctrinal, right? The best types of religious practice are a stance, are a commitment. You may fail, but if you're trying your best to succeed while knowing that you're human, and still be open to the possibility of change and changes, you'll be the better for it. If you know what I mean. So if we look at DEI or ADEI as a consistent practice, and we're open to listening to how we can change rather than enforcing as doctrine things that need to change now and set in stone, well, sorry if I needed to provide a little extra context, but
It's great. Thank you, Sam. Yeah, it is definitely a constant practice and it's going to continue changing and evolving. So I like to have that at the forefront of our mind at all times that there's always going to be some more work to be done.
So we finally come to the end of our panel. We would like to take a second to thank you for attending and being open to learning about inclusive practices in the workplace. We would especially like to give a massive thank you to our incredible speakers for contributing such valuable and insightful thoughts in today's Inclusion Talks event. Your participation has made this event truly impactful. We appreciate your commitment to promoting inclusive hiring practices and creating a more equitable workplace. The recording will be shared with all of the registrants sometime in the next few days, and we encourage you to share it with others to continue spreading the message of inclusion. Thank you so much.